Globalization and Emerging Markets. Let's take a look at what globalization is. Globalization is a growing trend towards worldwide markets in terms of products, capital and labour. The recent increase in free trade agreements and the reduced tariffs and quotas between countries and trade blocs has increased the speed of globalization. For example, look at the European Union, how they've collectively all binded together to ensure that they've got tariffs and quotas which enable all member states to freely trade, but at the same time keep out external competition. This is the same for the Americans and other markets. Globalization impacts on a business strategy because it leads to bring about increased trade potential with new markets. It can bring about the growth of new multinational organisations and the increase in size of existing ones to achieve larger economies of scale, moving away from the typical domestic markets that it may get in its more developed markets. And it also gives you the free movement of employees, so the ability to tap into new resources and skills to enhance the operation of your organisation. Okay, let's look at some of the advantages and disadvantages of globalisation. Some of the obvious advantages are that it increases the opportunity to sell into new markets such as China, Russia, India. These are markets that obviously have got the growing potential for large organisations. It also gives you the ability to create large global brands who may currently not have tapped into these new markets. It also gives you the ability to have greater access to new locations, new markets, and it gives you the ability to have a potential takeover and merger of new organisations. However, the drawbacks potentially could be that you've got increased competition from the new markets and the domestic players like you have in China at the moment and India. You also have different cultures and tastes that you need to adapt your organisation to. So for example, the working conditions, the working day, and maybe how they perceive going to the role of workplace and the actual culture of power, for example, or the task culture, or maybe even the laissez-faire culture that exists. You've got the communication issues you need to overcome, typically language barriers. However, these are becoming less of a problem as English is more the global language that's spoken, I think, a second language in most countries, if not the first language in many new developing countries, and you've got improved internet access. And of course, you've now got the new risk of takeovers from overseas competitors, so like Tata taking over Jaguar Land Rover, for example. So it does work both ways, that as these globalisation takes place, these new so-called markets start to grow, their organisations start to take over the markets that we are in, our domestic core markets. So remember, use some examples to support your knowledge. So use a Jaguar Land Rover and Tata example, or the way that Tata owns Tetley Tea as one of the brands. But also look at like the BRICS idea, so Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa as your new emerging markets. And the fact that Coca-Cola, for example, are spending vast sums of money to try and penetrate these markets and become the world's leading soft drink manufacturer in their markets. Don't be afraid to use your examples. So an emerging market is a country that has some characteristics of a developed market but is not fully developed. Typically, we look at this as this idea called BRICS at the moment: Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. They are all countries which are emerging. What you tend to find is the primary sector is starting to decline. They are moving into more secondary manufacturing, which obviously is bringing vast amounts of exports in their economies, which then brings in sums of money, which helps their economy to grow. And slowly, as they get inflation and wages increase, they start to look for the tertiary sector, and they become more developed like the Western world. And that is how it all works. Okay, when considering your strategy of expansion, you need to consider some of the following issues. For example, you need to think about political uncertainty, because in some of these newly emerging markets, you've got pressure groups pushing for political change. Now, this can have a massive effect on how the political decisions are made in that country and how an organisation operates, depending on what tariffs and what quotas, for example, and what restrictions are placed on the organisation. You've also got economic fluctuation. So, for example, you've got to consider the economic cycle and the phase that you're at. Typically, the newly emerging markets tend to suffer first when we have a global economic slowdown, as what happens to their exports is that they tend to drop because the Western markets tend to stop importing goods, so they feel it first, and that can have a massive effect again on your organisation. You've also got to consider the ethical issues, such as how you operate. Think about the issues recently with some clothing manufacturers who were accused of, in Bangladesh, of not fulfilling their ethical issues with the way clothes are being produced cheaply. However, then at the same time, you have to play this across against the unit cost reduction you're going to see. And then you've got the big issue of protectionism, one that's stopping Apple, for example, in China at the moment. The fact that they're still scared about the fact that there is a lack of intellectual property rights, and the local laws tend to overpower the national laws when it comes to this issue, and they don't really want to clamp down on it, maybe because they see that as restricting their ability to grow their economy. But obviously that's a massive effect on your brand and your reputation, the global image you're trying to create, and also takes away your unique selling points. Okay, that's it. You should now have an understanding of the globalization and emerging markets, and the impact that these have on the decisions you make as an organisation. Don't forget you can follow me on Twitter at BeeBusinessBee, and subscribe to my YouTube channel. You can tweet me any areas of business you want me to cover in the future, and remember to check out my website, beebusinessbee.co.uk.